what's up you guys, it's the Curious Owl here, and this next book review is going to be on the book It's Kind of a Funny Story by Ned Vizzini. Now, right off the bat, I absolutely loved this book. I am so happy that I finally got to read this after all of the amazing reviews I had heard of it from friends and from family and from other readers. This book is absolutely amazing with how it was written, with what the whole story is about. I can't get enough of this book. So for those of you who are not familiar with this book, it is about a boy named Craig Gilner who's 15 years old, and he deals with a lot of anxiety and depression after being placed in a very prestigious high school, and it really gets to him. And along with that, he has a crush on his best friend's girlfriend, and he just deals with a lot of things that cause him anxiety to the point where he becomes depressed. He stops eating, he stops sleeping, he really stops giving a crap about anything, and it causes him to kind of go through this cycle of just hatred for himself, that he gets to a point where he thinks about attempting suicide by jumping off of the Brooklyn Bridge. Now, this book was made into a movie a few years ago with Emma Roberts and Zach Galifianakis in it, playing some kind of, not minor characters, but they're not the main character of the story. And right off the bat, the movie is very different from the book. First of all, in the movie, they start out where he is sitting at the Brooklyn Bridge and about to jump off, and then he sees kind of a, almost like a conscience kind of vision of his family and what they would be saying if they were to see him doing this. That does not happen in the book. Essentially, what I believe that the people who made the It's Kind of a Funny Story movie did was take the first 100 pages or so up until he goes into the mental hospital in the book, and like started from when he's thinking about attempting suicide and continued from that point. In the book, they go a lot into his backstory, into where he's at, and why he's kind of the way he is, and why he decides to check himself into a mental hospital. So in the movie, they don't really go into that. There's a lot throughout, though, the rest of the book where it would hint at these things that kind of have caused him to be in this state, but they don't really express that those are the things. They just kind of show that he's a very depressed, very anxious kid, and that he just tried to attempt suicide because of his anxiety. And there's just a lot more to it. So, honestly, this book was absolutely amazing because Ned Vizzini, may his soul rest in peace, he really understood the mind of a student that is completely unable to cope with the things that they have to go through. Unfortunately, Ned Vizzini did pass away in 2012. I believe it was suicide. That was what people had told me, but I'm not 100% sure if that is true. But Ned Vizzini himself actually wrote this book right after having his own stint in a mental facility. He spent about the same amount of time as Craig did in this book, about 5 days, and once he got out, within the next month, wrote this entire novel based on his experiences in the mental hospital, his own experiences with anxiety and with depression, and it has made everyone who has read it feel so much better about themselves. I cannot tell you how amazing this book made me feel, because although the first about 100 pages were very heavy, with him going into a lot of what he was going through, the book made me feel better about the fact that I have anxiety myself, and that things will get better the more you kind of just make yourself try to do better. Unfortunately, we live in a society where as teenagers, we have all of these societal pressures on us that cause us to become more anxious. I can almost positively say that this generation of teenagers is the most anxiety and depression-ridden generation than ever before. And the reason I say that is because there's so many things that have come into our generation with technology and with advancements in several fields that it pressures us to do better, pressures us to kind of take that next step, figure out. Like, the older generations are like, oh, what's next for this generation? What's going to be bigger and better for this generation? And that causes a lot of anxiety for us as teenagers. And I feel like Ned Vizzini really hits home with that in this novel with his character Craig. Now, Craig has a lot of problems with him. Like I said earlier, he's very anxious about school, and he has this crush on his best friend's girlfriend, which causes a lot of anxiety for him. But in all honesty, Craig basically is every teenager's spirit person, honestly. Like, you have your own little spirit animal of Craig. Because a lot of what he goes through is very, very similar to a lot of other teenagers' lives. The whole fact of not performing up to everyone's standards is very anxiety-inducing for him, and is the biggest reason that he develops depression and thinks about committing suicide. He doesn't feel like he matches up to the standards of the school he goes to, with only having a kind of average grade at this pre-professional school. He doesn't feel like he meets the standards of this girl that he is absolutely smitten with, that he's in love with, and he doesn't feel like he would keep her interested, kind of thing. And he just doesn't really kind of sit and relax. He worries about everything, and I so relate to that, because I am such a worrier about everything. I am constantly worrying about everything that doesn't need to be worried about, and I can't help that. So I really relate to Craig, and so many other people who have anxiety and depression easily relate to him, because he goes through almost the same kind of things that they go through, as far as the kind of cycling of thoughts. And many times when people are anxious or depressed, they will not eat, they will not sleep, and he goes through all of that. But one of the greatest things about this book that Ned Vizzini does is he shows that, you know, you can get through these things if you really kind of try to make yourself get better. Unfortunately, though, we live in a world where some people are unable to cope with the things that kind of arise, and are unable to try to make themselves better and make things better for themselves, that they attempt suicide. And my heart goes out to everyone who has had someone close to them, whether it be family or friends, that have committed suicide. There have been so many people within this past year that I have heard of that I was never really I didn't really know them personally, but teenagers that had committed suicide that were friends of was a friend of one of my friends, and it's absolutely heart-wrenching. I cannot imagine how difficult that is to actually know that someone you know committed suicide. I have had friends who have had suicidal tendencies, and that alone is very heartbreaking, because you want them to live so badly and want them to have a desire to live, and sometimes it just doesn't, there's just no desire left, and it's one of the saddest things to see. But Ned Vizzini, I think part of the reason his novel is so great is just because he gives that kind of push to say, you know, you can get through this, you can survive this, you just have to be willing to try and be willing to make yourself get better no matter what. And unfortunately for him, it kind of got to a point where he, I guess, could not take society anymore. I don't really know why he committed suicide, if he did, and I don't think I will ever know, but unfortunately he is no longer with us. But his novel is probably going to be one of those novels that lives on forever for anyone that has anxiety and depression. Now, like I said, it was very heavy within the first 100 pages or so until he gets to the mental hospital. And the reason I say that is because I literally had to step away almost every 20 pages to kind of recollect my thoughts and breathe, because this book almost had me crying several times because of the descriptions that Ned Vizzini did when it came to Craig's thoughts and the things that he did. So when he would sit down for dinner, all of the thoughts would be cycling through his head, and when he would just be sitting by himself, the negative things that would go through his head, it made my stomach turn, and it was the worst thing I could ever think of for someone. It's just, the imagery was very strong, and it made me want to cry so many times. But once he got into the mental hospital and met all these great people there, things really lightened up. And thankfully, because I don't know if I would have been able to read the whole book if it continued to be as somber as it was. but I highly recommend this for anyone that has dealt with anxiety or depression, or honestly is very kind of curious as to what goes into the minds of someone with anxiety and depression, because this is a great gateway for that. This is a great way for you to understand somebody who has anxiety and depression, because it was written by someone who has experienced anxiety and depression. And God rest his soul, Ned Vizzini. It's a great novel, and I'm so happy I finally got to read it. So, as sad as it is, that's going to be the end of this book review. Such a great book. I highly recommend it to anyone. I would say no one under the age of maybe 14, because this is a very heavy book. It's very hard for someone to understand that is younger. But yeah, so anyone pretty much in high school, because this is about a kid who starts out in high school. So 14, 15 would probably be the youngest, I would say, and anyone older than that. Even someone that's an adult, I think, would really enjoy this book, because especially if there's an adult experiencing anxiety and depression, like it kind of gives them someone to kind of relate to. So, all that aside, the next book I will be reviewing for you guys is going to be Will Grayson by John Green and David Leviathan. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. I have no idea what this book is about, honestly, but it was really recommended to me by several friends when I started looking into John Green books. So I loved Looking for Alaska, and I loved Paper Towns to death, so I'm really hoping that this one is going to kind of live up to that. But I have no idea what this is about. All the book says is one cold night in a most unlikely corner of Chicago, two strangers cross paths. Two teens with the same name, running in two very different circles, suddenly find their lives going in new and unexpected directions, culminating in heroic turns of heart and the most epic musical ever to grace the high school stage. So apparently these two kids with the same name kind of meet up and things kind of happen. I don't really know. I had a lot of friends really like it though, so I'm excited to see how it is. But thank you guys so much for joining me in this book review of It's Kind of a Funny Story by Ned Vizzini. If you guys like this, please do give it a big thumbs up, and if you're not already and you'd like to be, hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock. And I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys!